The afternoon light filtered through the windows of Harmony Café as Rachel Torres counted the crumpled bills in her wallet for the third time, praying the total would somehow be different. $5.27. That was all that stood between her and complete financial disaster until her paycheck deposited in 3 days. At 31, Rachel was an ER nurse at County General Hospital, a job she loved despite the brutal hours and emotional toll. But loving her work didn't pay the student loans from nursing school, didn't cover the medical bills from her mother's recent hospitalization, and certainly didn't stretch far enough when her landlord had just raised the rent by $200 a month. She'd almost canceled this blind date. Her friend Melissa had set it up weeks ago, before Rachel's financial situation had become quite so desperate. But Melissa had been so excited, so insistent that James was perfect for Rachel. That canceling felt like letting down one of the few people who still believed Rachel's life could be about more than just surviving paycheck to paycheck. Besides, Rachel reasoned she'd already committed to meeting at Harmony Café, an upscale coffee shop she'd never been able to afford, but that Melissa had insisted was James's favorite spot. Rachel had carefully budgeted her last $5 for a small drip coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu, so she wouldn't sit there empty-handed. She'd skip dinner tonight and breakfast tomorrow, but at least she wouldn't embarrass herself in front of this stranger. Rachel pushed through the cafe's heavy glass doors, immediately feeling out of place among the polished professionals typing on laptops and the well-dressed couples chatting over artisan lattes. The cafe was beautiful, exposed brick walls, comfortable leather seating, original artwork, and the rich aroma of expensive coffee beans. It was exactly the kind of place Rachel dreamed of being able to visit regularly, back when she'd still believed nursing school meant financial stability. She approached the counter where a young barista with kind eyes greeted her warmly. "Welcome to Harmony. What can I get for you?" Rachel glanced at the menu board, confirming that the regular drip coffee was $4.50. "Just a small drip coffee, please, black." "Great choice. Our single-origin Ethiopian roast today is amazing. That'll be $4.50. Rachel handed over her $5 bill, accepting the 50 cents in change that represented her entire liquid assets until Friday. She found a table near the window with a view of the door so she could spot James when he arrived and settled in to wait, sipping her coffee slowly to make it last. What Rachel didn't know was that James was actually James Whitfield, the 36-year-old CEO and founder of Harmony Café, and the owner of 17 other locations across 3 states. James had built his coffee empire from a single food truck 8 years ago, and while he was now worth millions, he'd never forgotten what it felt like to count pennies and skip meals. James arrived at the cafe through the back entrance, as he usually did when visiting his original location. He'd been skeptical when his sister Melissa, yes, the same Melissa who was Rachel's friend, had set up this blind date. After his last relationship ended when he discovered his girlfriend was more interested in his money than in him, James had become wary of dating. But Melissa had been insistent. "Rachel is different," Melissa had promised. "She's genuine, kind, hardworking. She has no idea you own Harmony Café. I told her you work in food service management and love coffee." "That's not a lie. You do work in food service management. It's also not exactly the whole truth," James had pointed out, "which is why it's perfect. You'll know she likes you for you, not for what you can provide." Now, as James walked through the cafe toward the table where Rachel sat, he was struck immediately by how tired she looked. Not just physically tired, though there was that too, visible in the slight shadows under her eyes, but the deeper exhaustion that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. "Rachel?" he asked, approaching her table. She looked up, and James was struck by her smile, genuine and warm despite the weariness he could see in her posture. "James, hi. It's nice to finally meet you." "You too," James said, settling into the chair across from her. "Sorry if I'm a little late. I was just finishing up some work in the back office." "No worries. I just got here myself." Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, a gesture James recognized from countless observations of his customers, seeking comfort and warmth from something simple. "Can I get you another coffee? Or something to eat? Their pastries are incredible," James offered, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm good with this," Rachel said quickly, smiling to cover what James suspected was financial rather than preferential reasoning. They talked for the next hour, and James found himself genuinely captivated. Rachel spoke passionately about her work at the hospital, about the patients she'd helped save, about the frustrations of a healthcare system that often failed the people who needed it most. She asked thoughtful questions about his work in food service management, and when he described the challenges of running a business, she listened with genuine interest rather than the glazed-over politeness many people showed when the conversation turned to work. What struck James most was Rachel's complete lack of pretense. She didn't name-drop, didn't try to impress him with expensive hobbies or exclusive experiences. When he asked about her interests, she talked about hiking in state parks because it was free, about volunteering at the community health clinic on her days off, about the simple pleasure of reading library books before bed. "I know it probably sounds boring," Rachel said with a self-conscious laugh. "I'm not exactly living an exciting lifestyle right now." "It doesn't sound boring at all," James said honestly. "It sounds like you've built a life around what matters to you, helping people, staying connected to nature, learning. That's more meaningful than most people manage." Rachel's eyes softened with gratitude for his understanding. "That's a kind way to look at it. The truth is, nursing school left me with more debt than I expected, and my mom got sick last year, and, well, let's just say I'm not exactly swimming in disposable income for expensive hobbies right now." Her honesty was refreshing, even as it made James's chest tighten with recognition of her struggle. He'd been there, knew what it was like to choose between food and other necessities, to feel like you were working as hard as you could and still barely staying afloat. "I get that," James said quietly, "more than you might think." They talked until the cafe started filling with the dinner crowd, and James realized with surprise that 3 hours had passed. He hadn't felt this comfortable with someone in years, hadn't felt this certain that someone was interested in him rather than what he could provide. "I should probably get going," Rachel said reluctantly, glancing at her phone. "I have an early shift tomorrow, and I need to catch the bus." "Let me drive you home," James offered immediately. "Oh, I couldn't." "Please, it's on my way and it's getting dark." "Melissa would never forgive me if I let you take the bus home after our first date." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." As James pulled his modest Honda Civic, the same car he'd driven since before Harmony Café's success, up to Rachel's apartment building in a working-class neighborhood across town, he made a decision. "Rachel, I had a really wonderful time today. Would you like to go out again? Maybe this weekend?" "I'd love that," Rachel said, her smile genuine and unguarded. "But I have to be honest. I'm pretty broke right now. Could we maybe do something free? A walk in the park or—" "Actually," James said, "I have an idea. How would you feel about cooking dinner together at my place? I'll provide all the ingredients, you bring your company and conversation." "That sounds perfect," Rachel said, relief evident in her voice. Over the next 3 weeks, James and Rachel saw each other regularly. They cooked simple meals together at James's modest apartment. He'd never moved into anything fancy despite being able to afford it. They took long walks through the city. They visited museums on free admission days. Rachel never asked about his finances, never questioned why someone in food service management had such flexible hours, never seemed concerned with anything other than the conversations they shared and the connection they were building. James fell in love with her authenticity, her compassion, her work ethic, and the way she found joy in simple things. He loved how she talked about her patients with genuine care, how she volunteered her limited free time to help others, how she never complained about her circumstances but instead focused on gratitude for what she had. But he also saw how she struggled. He noticed that she often ordered the cheapest items when they occasionally met at Harmony Café. He saw her checking her bank balance anxiously on her phone. He overheard her on the phone with her landlord, negotiating a payment plan for rent she couldn't quite cover. It killed him not to help, not to simply transfer money to her account or pay off her loans. But he knew that Rachel's pride, her need to stand on her own 2 feet, was part of what made her who she was. And he feared that if he revealed his wealth now, She might wonder if everything between them had been some kind of test or manipulation. The truth came out by accident 4 weeks into their relationship. Rachel had a day off and decided to surprise James at work. She'd packed a picnic lunch with food she'd carefully budgeted for, planning to meet him for a quick break. When she walked into Harmony Café and asked the barista if James was available, the young woman's face lit up. "Oh, you're here to see Mr. Whitfield. He's in his office. I'll let him know you're here." "Mr. Whitfield?" Rachel repeated, confused. "Yeah, the owner, James Whitfield. He owns all the Harmony locations. He's usually working in the back office when he's here. You're Rachel, right? He talks about you all the time." Rachel felt the world tilt slightly. The owner. James owned this cafe. James owned 17 cafes. James was wealthy. And he'd let her sit here on their first date, nursing a $4 coffee because it was all she could afford, watching her count out her last $5. And he'd said nothing. When James emerged from the back office, his face lit up at seeing her, then fell when he saw her expression. "You own this place," Rachel said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Rachel, I can explain. You watched me order the cheapest thing on the menu. You watched me count out my last $5. You knew I was broke and you said nothing. Can we talk about this somewhere private?" James asked, aware of the curious eyes of customers and staff. In his office, with the door closed, Rachel stood with her arms crossed, feeling betrayed and humiliated. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to get to know me, the real me, not my bank account," James said earnestly. "Rachel, my last relationship ended because the woman I was dating cared more about what I could buy her than who I was. When Melissa set us up, she deliberately didn't tell you about my business because she knew you'd treat me differently if you knew." "Differently how?" "By not feeling like a charity case." Rachel's voice rose with hurt and anger. "Do you know how humiliating this is? I've been pinching pennies, ordering the cheapest food, suggesting free dates, while you've been sitting on millions and watching me struggle like it's some kind of social experiment." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, James? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you've been testing me, seeing if the poor nurse would still be interested in you even when she thought you didn't have money. Well, congratulations, you passed your little test. I'm sure it was very entertaining watching me count out quarters." "Rachel, please," James said, his voice breaking. "I'm in love with you." "I have been for weeks. But I was terrified that if you knew about the money, everything would change. You'd wonder if I was only interested in you because you needed help. Or you'd start second-guessing every conversation we've had." Rachel's anger deflated slightly, replaced by exhaustion and confusion. "I need to think," she said quietly. "I need some space to process this." "Of course," James said, though the words clearly hurt him. "Take all the time you need. But Rachel, please believe me. Everything between us has been real. The money doesn't change who I am or how I feel about you." For 3 days, Rachel didn't call. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home to her small apartment, and tried to sort through her tangled feelings. She was hurt by the deception, embarrassed by her financial struggles being so visible, and confused about whether their relationship could recover from such a fundamental breach of trust. On the 4th day, Melissa showed up at Rachel's apartment with takeout and a determination to mediate. "You're mad at James," Melissa said. "I get it. But you're also mad at yourself for being poor, and those are two different things." "That's not fair, isn't it? Rachel, you're one of the smartest, most capable people I know. You save lives for a living, but you've been taught that needing help is weakness, that struggling financially is somehow a moral failing. James didn't hide his wealth to humiliate you. He hid it because he wanted someone to love him for who he is, not what he has. Can you honestly say you wouldn't have treated him differently if you'd known he was rich?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "Maybe I would have. Maybe I would have been intimidated or felt like I had to impress him. Maybe I wouldn't have been as honest about my own situation." "Exactly. You both would have been performing versions of yourselves instead of being authentic. Yes, he should have told you sooner, but he was protecting something precious, the chance to be loved for himself. Don't throw away something real because the timing wasn't perfect. That evening, Rachel called James. "Can you come over? We need to talk." When James arrived, looking anxious and hopeful, Rachel let him in and gestured to the couch. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, "about trust, about honesty, about what it means to really know someone. And I've realized something. I fell in love with you because of who you are, how you listen, how you make me laugh, how you talk about wanting to create spaces where people feel welcome and comfortable. The money doesn't change any of that." "Rachel, but," she continued, holding up a hand, "I need you to understand how hard it's been for me. I've worked so hard to be independent, to not need anyone's help. Having you know about my struggles while hiding your resources made me feel exposed and vulnerable in a way that scared me." "I understand," James said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I was so afraid of losing you that I didn't consider how the deception itself might push you away." "I don't want to lose you either," Rachel admitted. "But going forward, we need complete honesty. No more hiding who we are in wealth or in struggle. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," James said, reaching for her hand. "Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." 6 months later, James and Rachel stood together at the opening of Harmony Café's newest location, this one located inside County General Hospital, where Rachel worked. The cafe offered discounted drinks and meals for hospital staff and had a special program providing free coffee to nurses working double shifts. "This was your idea," Rachel told James as they watched exhausted doctors and nurses gratefully accepting free drinks. "It was inspired by you," James corrected. "By watching you work yourself to exhaustion helping others, by understanding what it means to be in a profession where you give everything and often struggle to take care of yourself." James had also quietly paid off Rachel's student loans as a gift after 6 months of dating, a gesture that had led to another difficult conversation about charity versus love, about Rachel's pride versus James's desire to remove obstacles from her life. They'd eventually found a compromise. Rachel would accept help with past debts, but would continue supporting herself through her own work. And in return, she would help James direct his charitable giving toward causes she knew needed support. Today, Rachel works as both an ER nurse and as a consultant for the Harmony Café Foundation, which provides employment opportunities and support services for healthcare workers dealing with financial hardship. She and James are engaged, planning a modest wedding focused more on meaning than extravagance. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Rachel said to Melissa one afternoon. "That first date when I spent my last $5 on a coffee in a cafe I couldn't afford. I was so worried about embarrassing myself, about not being good enough for that space. But what I didn't know was that I was sitting across from someone who'd built that space, hoping to make people feel exactly the opposite of how I felt. Welcomed, valued, comfortable. And you fell in love with each other when you both thought you were just ordinary people," Melissa added with satisfaction. "We are ordinary people," Rachel corrected with a smile. "James just happens to also be wealthy. But that's not the important part of who he is. The important part is that he's kind and generous, and he sees value in people regardless of what they can afford to order. Sometimes the most important connections begin in moments of vulnerability, when we show up as our authentic selves, limitations and all." Rachel had walked into Harmony Café with her last $5, afraid of not measuring up. She'd left having met someone who measured worth not in bank accounts, but in character, compassion, and the courage to be real in a world that often rewards performance over authenticity. The money had complicated things, certainly, but it hadn't defined them. Because at the end of the day, what mattered wasn't that James could afford to pay off Rachel's debts, or that Rachel had shown up despite financial hardship. What mattered was that two people had chosen to be honest about their struggles and their hopes, had chosen to build something real despite fear and uncertainty, and had discovered that love, real love, isn't about wealth or poverty. It's about showing up, being seen, and choosing each other again and again, in small moments and large decisions, with complete honesty and unwavering commitment. And it all started with a $4 cup of coffee and the last $5 in a nurse's wallet, small things that led to something immeasurably valuable.